Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Greek mythology. So, today we're getting into part 3, which is supposed to be the great heroes before the Trojan War, and we're going to read part 1, Perseus, which is, I believe, often where you see the movie The Clash of the Gods. It's that story, I believe, if I remember right. They've got a picture in here of Perseus holding Medusa's head and the shield, so probably. More than likely. But anyway, let's hop into this. This is a story about the level of the fairy story. On the level of the fairy story. Hermes and Athena act like the fairy godmother in Cinderella. The magical wallet and cap belong to the properties fairy tales abound in everywhere. It is the only myth in which magic plays a decisive part, and it seems to have been a great favorite in Greece. Many poets allude to it. The description of Danae in the wooden chest was the most famous passage of the famous poet by Simonides of Chaos, a great lyric poet who lived in the 6th century. The entire story is told by both Ovid and Apollodorus. The latter, probably 100 years later than Ovid, is here the superior of the two. His account is simple and straightforward. Ovid's extremely verbose. For instance, he takes 100 lines to kill the sea serpent. I have followed Apollodorus, but I have added the fragment from Simonides and short quotations from other poets, notably Hesiod and Pindar. King Acrisius of Argos had only one child, a daughter, Danae. She was beautiful above all other women in the land, but this was small comfort to the king for not having a son. He journeyed to Delphi to ask the god if there was any hope that someday he would be the father of a boy. The priestess told him no, and added what was far worse, that his daughter would have a son who would kill him. The only sure way to escape that fate was for the king to have Danae instantly put to death, taking no chances but seeing to it himself. This Acrisius would not do. His fatherly affection was not strong, as events proved, but his fear of the gods was. They visited with terrible punishment those who shed the blood of kindred. Acrisius did not dare slay his daughter. Instead, he had a house built all of bronze and sunk underground, but with part of the roofs open to the sky so that light and air could come through. Here he shut her up and guarded her. So Danae endured the beautiful to change the glad daylight for brass-bound walls, and in that chamber, secret as the grave, she lived a prisoner, yet to her came Zeus in the golden rain. As she sat there through the long days and hours with nothing to do, nothing to see except the clouds moving by overhead, a mysterious thing happened. A shower of gold fell from the sky and filled her chamber. How it was revealed to her that it was Zeus who had visited her in this shape, we are not told, but she knew that the child she bore was his son. For a time she kept his birth secret from her father, but it became increasingly difficult to do so in the narrow limits of that bronze house. And finally one day the little boy, his name was Perseus, was discovered by his grandfather. "Your child!" Acrisius cried in great anger. "Who is his father?" But when Danae answered proudly, "Zeus," he would not believe her. One thing only he was sure of is that the boy's life was a terrible danger to his own. He was afraid to kill him for the same reason that had kept him from killing her: fear of Zeus and the Furies who pursue such murderers. But if he could not kill them outright, he could put them in the way of tolerably certain death. He had a great chest made and the two placed in it. Then it was taken out to sea and cast into the water. In that strange boat, Danae sat with her little son. The daylight faded and she was alone on the sea. When in the carven chest the winds and waves struck fear into her heart, she put her arms, not without tears, around Perseus tenderly. She said, "O son, what grief is mine! But you sleep softly, little child, sunk deep in rest with your cheerless home. Only a box, brass bound, the night this darkness visible, the scudding waves so near to your soft curls, the shrill voice of the wind you do not heed, nestled in your red cloak, fair little face." Through the night in the tossing chest, she listened to the waters that seemed always about to wash over them. The dawn came, but with no comfort to her, for she could not see it. Neither could she see that around them were the islands rising high above the sea, many islands. All she knew was that presently a wave seemed to lift them and carry them swiftly on, and then retreating, leave them on something solid and motionless. They had made land. They were safe from the sea, but they were still in the chest with no way to get out. Fate willed it, or perhaps Zeus, who up to now had done little for his love and his child, that they should be discovered by a good man, a fisherman named Dictys. He came upon the great box and broke it open and took the pitiful cargo home to his wife, who was as kind as he. They had no children, and they cared for Danae and Perseus as if they were their own. The two lived there many years, Danae content to let her son follow the fisherman's humble trade out of harm's way. But in the end, more trouble came. Polydectes, the ruler of the little island, was the brother of Dictys, but he was a cruel and ruthless man. He seems to have taken no notice of the mother and son for a long time, but at last Danae attracted his attention. She was still radiantly beautiful, even though Perseus by now was full grown, and Polydectes fell in love with her. He wanted her, but she did not want her son. But he did not want her son, and he set himself to think out a way of getting rid of him. There was some fearsome monsters called Gorgons, who lived on an island and were known far and wide because of their deadly power. Polydectes evidently talked to Perseus about them. He probably told him that he would rather have the head of one of them than anything else in the world. This seems practically certain from the plan he devised for killing Perseus. He announced that he was about to be married, and he called his friends together for a celebration, including Perseus in the invitation. Each guest was, as was customary, brought a gift for the bride-to-be, except Perseus alone. He had nothing he could give. He was young and proud and keenly mortified. He stood up before them all and did exactly what the king had hoped he would do, declared that he would give him a present better than any there. He would go off and kill Medusa and bring back her head as his gift. Nothing could have suited the king better. No one in his senses would have made such a proposal. Medusa was one of the Gorgons. And they are three, the Gorgons, each with wings and snaky hair most horrible to mortals, whom no man shall behold and draw again the breath of life, for the reason that whoever looked at them was turned instantly into stone. It seemed that Perseus had been led by his angry pride into making an empty boast. No man unaided could kill Medusa, but Perseus was saved from his folly. Two great gods were watching over him. He took ship as soon as he left the king's hall, not daring to see his mother first and tell her what he intended. And he sailed to Greece to learn where the three monsters were found. He went to Delphi, but all the priestess would say was to bid him seek the land where men eat not Demeter's golden grain, but only acorns. So he went to Dodona in the land of oak trees, where the talking oaks were, which declared Zeus's will, and where the Selli lived, who made their bread from acorns. They could tell him, however, no more than this, that he was under the protection of the gods. They did not know where the Gorgons lived. When and how Hermes and Athena came to his help is not told in any story, but he must have known despair before they did so. At last, however, as he wandered on, he met a strange and beautiful person. We know what he looked like from many a poem. A young man with the first down upon his cheek, and when youth is loveliest, carrying as no other young man ever did, a wand of gold with wings at one end, wearing a winged hat too and winged sandals. At sight of him, hope must have entered Perseus's heart, for he would know that this could be none other than Hermes, the guide and the giver of good. This radiant personage told him that before he attacked Medusa, he must first be properly equipped, and that what he needed was in the possession of the nymphs of the north. To find the nymphs' abode, they must go to the gray women who alone could tell them the way. The women dwelled in a land where all was dim and shrouded in twilight. No ray of sun ever looked on that country, nor the moon by night. In that gray place the three women lived, all gray themselves and withered in extreme old age. They were strange creatures indeed, most of all because they had but one eye for the three, which it was their custom to take turns with, each removing it from her forehead when she had it for a time and handing it to another. All this Hermes told Perseus, and then he unfolded his plan. He would himself guide Perseus to them. Once there, Perseus must keep hidden until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead to pass it on. At that moment, when none of the three could see, he must rush forward and seize the eye and refuse to give it back until they told him how to reach the nymphs of the north. He himself, Hermes said, would give him a sword to attack Medusa with, which could not be bent or broken by the Gorgon's scales, no matter how hard they were. This is a wonderful gift, no doubt, and yet of what use was a sword when the creature to be struck by it could turn the swordsman into stone before he was within striking distance? But another great deity was at hand to help. Pallas Athena stood beside Perseus. She took off the shield of polished bronze which covered her breast and held it out to him. "Look into this when you attack the Gorgon," she said. "You will be able to see her in it as a mirror and avoid her deadly power." Now indeed Perseus had good reason to hope. The journey to the Twilight Land was long, over the stream of ocean and on to the very border of the Black Country where the Cimmerians dwell. But Hermes was his guide, and he could not go astray. They found the gray women at last, looking in the wavering light like gray birds, for they had the shape of swans. But their heads were human, and beneath their wings they had arms and hands. Perseus did just as Hermes had said. He held back until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead. Then, before she could give it to her sister, he snatched it out of her hand. It was a moment or two before the three realized they had lost it. Each thought one of the others had it, but Perseus spoke out and told them he had taken it and that it would be theirs again only when they showed him how to find the nymphs of the north. They gave him full directions at once. They would have done anything to get their eye back. He returned it to them and went on the way they had pointed out to him. He was bound, although he did not know it, by the blessed country of the Hyperboreans, at the back of the north wind, of which it is said, neither by ship nor yet by land shall one find the wondrous road to the gathering place of the Hyperboreans, but Perseus had Hermes with him, so that the road lay open to him, and he reached that host of happy people who were always banqueting and holding joyful revelry. They followed him, they showed him great kindness. They welcomed him to their feast, and the maidens dancing to the sound of the flute and lyre paused to get for him the gifts he sought. These were 3 winged sandals, a magic wallet which would always become the right size for whatever was to be carried in it, and most important of all, a cap which made the wearer invisible. With these and Athena's shield and Hermes' sword, Perseus was ready for the Gorgons. Hermes knew where they lived, and leaving the happy land, the 2 flew back across ocean and over the sea to the terrible sisters' island. By great good fortune they were all asleep when Perseus found them. In the mirror of the bright shield he could see them clearly, creatures with great wings and bodies covered with golden scales, and hair a mass of twisting snakes. Athena was beside him now, as well as Hermes. They told him which one was Medusa, and that was important, for she alone of the 3 could be killed. The other 2 were immortal. Perseus, on his winged sandals, hovered above them, looking, however, only at the shield. Then he aimed a stroke down at Medusa's throat, and Athena guided his hand. With a single sweep of his sword, he cut through her neck, and his eyes still fixed on the shield with never a glance at her, he swooped low enough to seize the head. He dropped it into the wallet which closed around it. He had nothing to fear from it now. But the 2 other Gorgons had awakened, and horrified at the sight of their sister slain, tried to pursue the slayer. Perseus was safe. He had on the cap of darkness, and they could not find him. So over the sea, rich-haired Danae's son, Perseus on his winged sandals sped, flying swift as thought, in a wallet of silver, a wonder to behold. He bore the head of the monster, while Hermes, the son of Maia, the messenger of Zeus, kept ever at his side. On his way back, he came to Ethiopia and alighted there. By the time Hermes had left him, Perseus found, as Hercules was later to find, that a lovely maiden had given up to be devoured by a horrible sea serpent. Her name was Andromeda, and she was the daughter of a silly, vain woman. That starred Ethiop queen, who strove to set her beauty's praise above the sea nymphs and their power offended. She had boasted that she was more beautiful than the daughters of Nereus, the sea god, an absolutely certain way in those days to draw down on one a wretched fate was to claim superiority to anything over any deity. Nevertheless, people were perpetually doing so. In this case, the punishment for the arrogance the gods detested fell not on Queen Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mother, but on her daughter. The Ethiopians were being devoured in numbers by the serpent, and learning from the oracle that they could be freed from the pest only if Andromeda were offered up to it, they forced Cepheus, her father, to consent. When Perseus arrived, the maiden was on a rocky ledge by the sea, chained there to wait for the coming of the monster. Perseus saw her and on the instant loved her. He waited beside her until the great snake came for its prey. Then he cut its head off just as he had the Gorgons. The headless body dropped back into the water. Perseus took Andromeda to her parents and asked for her hand, which they gladly gave him. With her he sailed back to the island as his mother, but in the house where he had lived long he found no one. The fisherman Dictys's wife was long since dead, and the two others, Danae and the man who had been like a father to Perseus, who had to fly and hide themselves from Polydectes, who was furious at Danae's refusal to marry him. They had taken refuge in a temple, Perseus was told. He learned also that the king was holding a banquet in the palace, and all the men who favored him were gathered there. Perseus instantly saw his opportunity. He went straight to the palace and entered the hall. As he stood at the entrance, Athena's shining buckler on his breast, the silver wallet at his side, he drew the eyes of every man there. Then, before any could look away, he held up the Gorgon's head, and at the sight, one and all, the cruel king and his servile courtiers were turned into stone. There they sat, a row of statues, each, as it were, frozen stiff in the attitude he had struck when he first saw Perseus. When the islanders knew themselves freed from the tyrant, it was easy for Perseus to find Danae and Dictys. He made Dictys king of the island, but he and his mother decided that they would go back with Andromeda to Greece and try to be reconciled to Perseus, to see if the many years that had passed since he had put them in the chest had not softened him so that he would be glad to receive his daughter and grandson. When they reached Argos, however, they found that Acrisius had been driven away from the city, and where he was no one could say. It happened that soon after their arrival, Perseus heard that the king of Larissa in the north was holding a great athletic contest, and he journeyed there to take part. In the discus throwing, when his turn came, and he hurled the heavy missile, it swerved and fell among the spectators. Acrisius was there on a visit to the king, and the discus struck him. The blow was fatal, and he died at once. So Apollo's oracle was again proved true. If Perseus felt any grief, at least he knew that his grandfather had done his best to kill him and his mother. With his death, their troubles came to an end. Perseus and Andromeda lived happily ever after. Their son Electryon was the grandfather of Hercules. Medusa's head was given to Athena, who bore it always upon the Aegis. Zeus's shield, which she carried for him. So yeah, that is the full story of Perseus, which most of us probably recognize as the Clash of the Gods when it entered in movie form. In this, he apparently doesn't have Pegasus. He uses winged sandals. And he had not to worry about Medusa looking at him because she was asleep. I believe Athena and Hermes were also in the movie, so yeah. Yeah. And he has a great lineage because his grandson is Hercules. So, yeah. Pretty interesting. So, yeah, if you've ever seen the movie Clash of the Gods, you can see where the similarities and differences are between the story itself. I mean, the same general idea is there. He goes on a mission. He meets up with the gray women who are the prophets. He ends up tricking, taking their eyes so they'll tell him what he needs to know, and giving. I think he like tosses the eye back on the ground, so they scramble around looking for it. Yeah. He goes, kills Medusa, takes her head. And then, as he's traveling back, he saves this girl from being devoured by. I think in the movie they say it's the Kraken, but in the story here, it's not the Kraken. It's just a sea serpent. So yeah, you can tell where they tried to embellish a bit. But yeah, that was the story of Perseus. The next one will be Theseus. We're getting pretty far through the book. I think we're about halfway through here. But yeah, that will be the end of this episode. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.